The relative pronoun relates a dependent clause back to a noun. Okay, let me explain that, okay? For example, the man who teaches us Greek is dashingly handsome, right? Now, forget the dashingly handsome part, that's debatable, but here's the point. Who teaches us Greek? That little phrase is a dependent clause. If I came up to you and said, who teaches us Greek? You would say, what? I need more information. It's a dependent clause. It can't stand on its own. It's dependent. But notice that that little phrase, who teaches us Greek, goes back and modifies the man. Which man? The man who teaches us Greek. So that's what a relative clause is, and a relative pronoun is the glue, the little word that connects this noun to a dependent clause that acts like a modifier to give us a little more information about the man. Which man? The man who teaches us Greek is dashingly handsome. Or I could say, the dog to whom I speak, this is Reese, by the way, the dog to whom I speak has bad breath. Need some breath mints, Reese. But do you see how to whom I speak here modifies the dog? Which dog? The dog to whom I speak. Or I could say, the cat who was taking a nap has sharp claws. And I know this because the cat who was taking a nap took a swipe at me when I woke him up. Who was taking a nap. You see, is modifying the cat. Which cat? The cat who was taking a nap. Now, the cat who was taking a nap wants down. So anyway, you get the point. The relative clause modifies, goes back and modifies the noun. In this case, the cat. Which cat? The cat who was taking a nap. Now this can get very confusing because of a quirk of English. In English, the interrogative pronoun, the one that asks a question, is exactly the same as the relative pronoun. Now, this is English's problem here, not Greek. But if I say, who is the man who teaches us Greek? Who is the man there asks a question, right? So it's an interrogative pronoun. The who there is not a relative pronoun, but an interrogative pronoun. And you say, but it's the same word. Exactly. It's the same word, and that's what's confusing. To whom am I speaking? This is Hallie. She's a lot more calm, right, Hallie? Give me a little kiss, all right? To whom am I speaking? Now, whom there is not a relative pronoun. It's an interrogative pronoun, which is frustrating because it's the same form. So in English, the interrogative pronoun and the relative pronoun have the same form. To whom am I speaking? This is Hallie. I might also say something like, who sharpens your claws? Do you see there that who is not a relative pronoun in that sentence? It's an interrogative pronoun. It asks a question. Who? It's a question. But if I say the cat who is in my arms has about had it with this video, that use of who is a relative pronoun. Which cat? The cat who is in my arms and is now done with this. But see, this problem is a problem with English, not Greek. The problem is that in English, the relative pronoun and the interrogative pronoun use the same forms. In Greek, this won't be true, so this will help us out. The relative pronoun is ha in Greek, and the interrogative pronoun is tis. We look at that next week, but they're different, okay, in Greek. So Greek will clear this up for you. Again, your confusion is not Greek. Your confusion is English. But now let's make sure you understand the function of the relative pronoun. The relative pronoun takes a dependent clause and connects it to a noun, and it turns that clause into a modifier. So students who work hard will master Greek. Did you hear it? Who work hard. Which students? The hard-working students. The who work hard students will master Greek. So the relative pronoun connects this little dependent clause back to a noun. That's the function. It's not real difficult, but I just want to make sure you get it. Now, here's the good news. The form of the relative pronoun is very easy. In fact, it's the noun endings with a rough breathing mark and an accent. It couldn't be more simple. Let's take a look. Take a look in your master chart and just compare the relative pronoun with the case endings for the 2, 1, 2 nouns. os, u, o, on. Now look at the relative pronoun. Has, hu, ho, han. What do you see that's different? Well, rough breathing, right? And accent mark. Always on every relative pronoun, there is a rough breathing and an accent mark. So in the plural, the endings are oi, on, ois, us. But the relative pronoun is simply hoi, hon, hois, hus. Down the feminine column, we have he, heis, he, hain, hi, hon, heis, has. So can you see, once you learn the 2-on-2 noun endings, and then you know the article, and once you know the article, then you know the third person pronouns, and once you know them, you know the relative pronouns. Do you see? It looks pretty overwhelming when you look at the master chart and you see all of these words, but when you understand the patterns by which they're being made, it's really not that difficult, is it? Now look at the neuter here. This is the one exception, and there's only one. The neuter is ha rather than like han here. So we have ha, hu, ho, ha, and then ha, hon, hois, ha. So the forms of the relative pronoun are very easy. And you can see that they are masculine, feminine, and neuter, singular and plural, and they show you the case. And just for fun, just take a look at the article. And this is the kind of thing you ought to do when you're learning a new word. You don't need to memorize all these forms because you really already know them. You want to look for just the little odd things. For example, you might notice here that in the nominative masculine singular here, we have ha. That looks very much like the neuter nominative singular here, ha. And the only difference is that accent mark. So really pay attention to that. Remember, if there is a rough breathing and an accent mark, you're looking at a relative pronoun. Notice too here, the only difference in the feminine nominative here is the accent mark. Otherwise, it's pretty obvious. You have a rough breathing and an accent mark. That's your big clue. You're looking at a relative pronoun. Let's look at a few relative pronouns in John 1. We come across our first one in verse 3. Ha geganin in auto zoe ein. Okay, let's look at this little phrase right here. Notice our relative pronoun, we translate it that which because it's ha. You can see how in English we know that it's neuter. It should be which, not those who came to be in him, because it's not referring to male or female subject, it's referring to neuter. So that's why we say that which. And it's not those which, or those who, we would say in English, because, well, first of all, it's not a who, and we wouldn't say the things which, plural, because it's not alpha, it's omicron. So you can see how the case number and gender here of the relative pronoun give us a lot more information than we would have in English. So here's our relative clause. Ha geganen in auto, that which came to be in him, life was. So life was what came to be in him. So can you see how this relative pronoun turns this whole phrase into one concept? That which came to be in him. Here's another example in verse 9. And once again, we have this neuter singular form of the pronoun. He was the light, the true. Ein ta phos ta alethanon. He was the true light, which ha photidze panta anthropon, which enlightens every man. So here's our phrase, ha photidze panta anthropon. So this relative pronoun is turning all of this into a dependent clause. It's just a single idea. And what does it refer back to? What is it that enlightens every man? Well, the light, right? The light, the true, which enlightens every man. So it's this thing that enlightens every man is the light. So again, this links back to taphos, which is why it's neuter, and it gives us a little more information about this light. It is the light which enlightens every man. There is an especially interesting one here in verse 13. Hoi. Okay, so we look at that and we know that this is, let's just get this figured out, this is a nominative plural masculine, right? Hoi. All right, so what is our subject up here? Well, we're talking about these believing ones. In verse 12, as many as received him, he gave them authority to become children of God, to the ones believing in his name. Okay, and it goes on then to describe these ones who believe in his name. And I want you to notice here that the case and number match. Here we have a masculine plural, and here we have a masculine plural. But what do you see about the case? Doesn't match, does it? And I want to just point that out to you. This you will find maybe a little confusing. Don't panic about this, but you need to understand that the case of the relative pronoun does not have to match the antecedent, the thing that it refers back to. The case of the relative pronoun is determined by its use in the relative clause. And in this case, all of verse 13 is the relative clause. Okay, but this is the subject. They are the ones who, not of blood, nor of the will of flesh, nor of the will of man, but of God are born. That's a mouthful, isn't it? And that's why this is kind of a cool one. Really, all of verse 13 is a relative clause. And verse 13, this whole verse goes back and defines the believing ones. Okay, the believing ones are who? Well, they are those who uk ex haimaton, ude ek. Read this with me, by the way. When I read, I'm not just like, reading for my own practice. I want you to get used to hearing the Greek. So read with me. Uk ex haimaton, ude ek thalematos sarkas, ude ek thalematos andras, all ek theu egenethesan. Okay, but just notice that this who is this whole verse. The whole verse is a relative clause, and this is the subject of the relative clause. These are the ones who, not this, not that, but that. Okay, so can you see why that's nominative? It's the subject of the relative clause. Oops, I don't want to move it around. But in number and gender, it matches its antecedent, the believing ones. Those hoi uk ex haimaton, ude ek thalematos sarkas, ude ek thalematos andras, all ek theu egenethesan. Here's another one down in verse 15, han, okay, and this is the accusative singular masculine form. Okay, so what's going on with this one in the sentence? Okay, so we start off, Ioannes martyrei peri autou, kai kekragen, legon, hutas ein han epon. Here's our phrase right here we need to focus in on. Hutas is a demonstrative pronoun. We'll get to that very soon here, but it means this. Okay, so this one is he. I said whom. Now, here's our relative clause right here. I said him. And then he goes on to sort of like a quote here. The one after me is before me because he was ahead of me. Okay, but let's not worry about that. Let's focus in right here in this phrase. This is he. I said whom. Okay, now I want you to notice here, han epon, this is our relative phrase right here. But notice that the number and gender match. Hutas, even though we might not have studied these pronouns yet, we recognize that ending. That's nominative singular masculine. Han, we know, is accusative singular masculine. So why is that mixed up? Same as before. This is the subject of the sentence, but this is the object in the relative clause. I said him. See, it's receiving the action of the saying, so that's why it's accusative. So again, the gender and number match, but the case doesn't have to match. The case, it might match. It just depends on how the relative pronoun is being used in the relative clause. Don't sweat too much about that because in English it won't be that difficult. But we do the same thing in English if it makes you feel any better. This is he of whom. See, that's accusative, or using it like an object in English too. This is he of whom I said. I said him. we wouldn't say, this is he who I said. See what I mean? We do the same thing in English. So this is true in Greek and in English. I'll say it one more time. The number and gender of the relative pronoun will match its antecedent. But the case of the relative pronoun is determined by its use in the relative clause. Now look down at verse 27, and here we have who again, but notice this is the genitive form. It could be masculine, it could be neuter. In this case it's masculine because it's referring back to the one coming after John, ha opiso mu erchamenos, Jesus of course. So who, of whom, so there's our translation. Let's look at this grammatically very quickly here. Ha opiso mu erchamenos, who, of whom not I am worthy in order that I might loose of him the strap of his sandals. Not worthy to untie his shoes, okay? But notice that this relative pronoun turns the rest of the verse into a relative clause, modifying the one coming after. Well, tell me about this one coming out after. Well, of him I'm not worthy to unloose his sandals. But this who here turns this whole idea, the whole rest of the verse, into a modifier of the one coming after. Down in verse 30, we have a relative pronoun with a, you can see it here, sort of give it away, don't I? A preposition. And you'll notice huper, who, here, huper with the genitive means in behalf of. So we would say in behalf of whom. So this is the one, huper who, ego, epon, I said. So huper u here. Notice the preposition with the genitive. We've got to get used to these prepositions because anytime you see a preposition, the preposition sort of takes over and determines the case of its object. In verse 38, here we go, ha, either nominative or accusative, right? And it's neuter, singular. So, ha legetai, oh boy, let's see if we can do this. Meth, me, nu, men, on. Meth me nuomenon. Meth me nuomenon. What a handful, huh? But what's the relative clause here? Which is interpreted teacher. Okay, so rabbi, which we're looking at an Aramaic word, which John will translate for his Gentile readers into teacher, right? Okay. Rabbi ha legetai meth ermenuamenon didaskale, which is interpreted teacher. Okay, the number and gender here, well, this is confusing, isn't it? Because Rabbi, this is a nominative, and it's also masculine, but here we have a neuter. Why? Because this ha refers not to Rabbi, but back actually to the name, which name is interpreted. And if you'll remember, anima is a neuter noun. So, okay, sometimes we can overanalyze and just make it harder than it needs to be, but we get it, huh? Ha, it just sort of lines up with English. Rabbi ha legetai meth erminu amenon didaskale, okay, which is interpreted teacher. Then in verse 41, we have the same thing. Messian, ha, estin, meth ermenuamenon, there we go again, meth ermenuamenon. Meth ermenuamenon Christos. Messian, Messiah, which is translated anointed one, Christ, Christos. So once again, similar deal. And then look right here, we have exactly the same deal. We'll translate Kephas, which is the Aramaic for the Greek, Peter, rock. Ha, ermeneuetai, Petros. Do you hear this just for curiosity here? Hermeneutics, ermeneuetai, is translated. But here's our relative clause. Ha, ermeneuetai Petros. The name, Peter, that's what it means. When you see a relative pronoun, look for the relative clause. And in this case, it's kind of a long one. Whom Moses wrote in the law and the prophets, we have found. So here's the subject and verb. We have found whom Moses wrote in the law and the prophets. So this han turns the whole thing into the object of the finding here. Then here's our last one in verse 47, and notice once again we have a preposition. So the preposition is determining the case here. In whom, in takes the dative. So we have the dative form, in whom. Of course, referring back to the true Israelite here. So who understands me? You see, that's a trick. Who, in that case, is an interrogative pronoun. The relative pronoun, better put the cat down. The relative pronoun, dogs are just so much more pleasant. The relative pronoun is not a question, right? It's something that relates a dependent clause back to a noun. And we can say the students who caught that trick question are geniuses.